landed in Seattle just after 4 p.m. The rain was falling in that gentle, misty way only this city knows how to do. My carry-on bumped quietly along the sidewalk behind me. Inside it, carefully folded, was my full dress uniform, decorated with a silver eagle insignia I had earned but rarely talked about. The family dinner was Mom's idea. She emailed last week, simply saying, "Let's have everyone home Sunday, it's been too long." I knew the real reason. My older brother, Derek, had just been promoted to lead engineer at Aerolink Systems, the aerospace company where my father has worked for almost 2 decades. When I stepped inside the house, it felt exactly the same. Same photos lining the walls, same scent of Mom's roast chicken coming from the kitchen. She greeted me with a quick hug, then turned to check on the oven. Dad offered a distracted, "Hey, kiddo," before returning to the conversation with Derek in the living room. The house was full of energy, but not for me. I sat on the edge of the sofa listening as they praised Derek for his promotion. He was beaming, talking about the big government contract Aerolink was chasing, something to do with strategic military aviation systems. He said he was part of the technical team preparing the final presentation. Mom chimed in, proud as ever. "They say the CEO herself will attend the briefing. Isn't that something? Derek's name will be right there on the documents." Not one of them asked what I'd been working on. Eventually, someone muttered, "Layla, are you still in the military?" I nodded with a smile. "Yes, still active." "Wow, that's commitment," someone replied, before the room drifted back to Derek's latest successes. No one asked why I had come back wearing plain clothes instead of my uniform. No one noticed the small scar above my wrist, earned during an emergency aircraft recovery. They didn't ask about the ribbons I'd earned overseas or the reason I'd been flown out last month for a private security briefing at the Pentagon. I didn't mind. Not really. I had grown used to being invisible around my family. What mattered to them was who held the corporate titles, who had their name on a presentation slide, and who knew how to smile for a boardroom. But tomorrow, none of them would be able to ignore me. They had no idea that I was the senior officer overseeing the defense contract Aerolink was pitching. No idea that I had been assigned as the military's direct evaluator for their bid. And no idea that by this time tomorrow, I'd be walking into their sacred boardroom in full uniform, with authority none of them ever imagined I had. I let them talk. I smiled. I kept my posture straight. Because I knew the moment was coming. And when it did, I wouldn't need to say a single word. Dinner was served with all the usual fanfare. Mom had made her signature rosemary chicken. The table was set with the good china, and even the cloth napkins were folded into little triangles like it was Thanksgiving. But it wasn't gratitude in the air. It was celebration. Derek's celebration. "To Derek," Dad toasted, raising his glass of wine. "Your future is just getting started. Aerolink is lucky to have you." Everyone clinked glasses. I took a sip of water. Mom leaned forward with a proud grin. "Did you hear? The CEO, Miriam Reeves, is attending the final pitch next week. She hardly ever does that. Shows how much they value the team." Derek smirked. "Yeah, rumor is she's bringing someone from the military to sit in. No idea who, but it's supposed to be someone high up." I kept my face neutral. Then came the usual jabs, light on the surface but sharp underneath. "Layla," Uncle Greg said, carving into his chicken, "do they have you flying around much these days, or are you still just stationed somewhere?" "She's always been more of the hands-on type," Dad added with a chuckle. "Didn't want to be in a lab or an office, she needed action." Derek chimed in, grinning. "Layla used to be so good at math. Who knew she'd end up tightening bolts on fighter jets?" They all laughed. I smiled politely, though my jaw was tight. None of them knew I'd once led a rapid response engineering team in the Middle East, performing emergency repairs under fire. None of them knew I had been flown to Germany to consult NATO on cross-alliance aircraft integration. They didn't care. To them, I was the one who ran off to the military instead of building a future. "Must be hard not having a normal job," Mom said softly, as if that were a gentle observation. "But we're glad you're doing what makes you happy." I looked at my brother, who sat tall in his suit, proud of the badge clipped to his belt. I looked at my father, who had built his entire identity around Aerolink's technical division. And I looked at myself, calm and silent, knowing I'd walked paths they couldn't begin to understand. They wanted to celebrate titles, offices, and catered meetings. That was fine. Tomorrow I wouldn't need a title on a name tag. Tomorrow I'd walk into that room wearing mine on my chest, stitched into my uniform. And when I took my seat at the head table, they'd all know who I was. Not just a soldier, not just a sister, not just the quiet one. Colonel Layla Monroe, United States Air Force. Strategic Command and Procurement Oversight. They would see me, even if they never truly saw me at all. After dinner, I slipped upstairs to the room that used to be mine. It hadn't changed. Same faded wallpaper. Same bookshelf filled with textbooks and science fair trophies collecting dust. Even the glow-in-the-dark stars I stuck to the ceiling when I was 12 were still there. Dim, but stubborn. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked over at the closet. My dress uniform was hanging on the back of the door, freshly pressed. The silver eagle glinted softly in the low light. A quiet reminder of everything I'd accomplished outside this house. I ran my fingers over the fabric and remembered the first time I told my parents I wanted to join the Air Force. It was the summer after my junior year in college. I had an internship offer at a top civilian aerospace lab, the kind of job most people would kill for. But something in me knew I needed more. Not just lab coats and theories. I wanted purpose, pressure, leadership. I wanted to build things that could fly into chaos and make it back. When I told Dad, he looked at me like I'd spat in his face. "You're walking away from everything we planned for you," he said. "Everything I built." Mom called it a phase, said I was rebelling, said I'd come back once I saw how hard military life really was, but I never came back. I remembered my first deployment. I was just 24. We were stationed at a forward operating base with barely enough spare parts to keep 2 jets running. One night, a bird strike disabled an aircraft mid-mission. The pilot radioed in, panicked. I had less than an hour to diagnose, disassemble, and rebuild a critical piece of the engine. It was my call, my tools, my hands. We got the jet flying again. That pilot sent me a letter after, said he owed me his life. Years later, I stood on the stage at Andrews Air Force Base, the youngest woman in my division to be promoted to colonel. I had sent an email invitation to my parents, told them the exact time, the exact building. I even offered to pay for their flights. They never came. Mom said they had a quarterly meeting. Important clients, can't reschedule. That's when I stopped expecting anything. Now, sitting in this room again, I felt the familiar ache of being unseen. Not hated, just dismissed. Like my life didn't quite fit their definition of success. I reached for my operations badge and the folded white gloves beside it. Every crease in that uniform held stories they'd never care to hear. Names I carried. Missions I buried. Sacrifices I made so others could come home. Tomorrow I would not be Layla, the quiet daughter. Or Layla, the one who left. Tomorrow I would walk into that conference room as Colonel Monroe, and they would finally have no choice but to look up. The next morning, I arrived at Aerolink Systems 20 minutes early. The lobby was sleek. Glass walls, polished steel, framed awards lining the halls. I'd walked through dozens of defense contractors in my career, but this one felt personal. My father had helped build this company's name. My brother was the new golden boy. No one expected me to walk through those doors as anything more than a visitor. I was escorted upstairs by a civilian liaison and led to a private room where military representatives were scheduled to review the technical proposal. Outside the main briefing hall, I heard chatter. Voices I recognized. My father's, low and confident. Derek's, excited and rehearsed. They were getting ready to present their pitch to the Air Force. They had no idea I was the one evaluating it. A staffer handed me a program. I scanned the agenda. My name wasn't listed, just Military Oversight Officer, USAF. That's how it always was. We weren't there for the spotlight. We were there to listen, to observe, to decide. The doors opened, a hush fell over the room as the Aerolink team filed in. At the head of the room stood Miriam Reeves, the CEO, a tall woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and calm authority. She greeted everyone with a firm handshake, her press team and board members trailing behind her like shadows. "We're honored to host today's military review," she said into the mic. Our team has worked tirelessly to prepare this proposal for the U.S. Air Force. She glanced toward the main doors. We are also joined by a special guest from the Department of Defense, an officer who will be overseeing the strategic and technical alignment of this bid. My cue. I stepped inside. Silence. The room, filled with engineers, executives, and reporters, all turned at once. My heels echoed against the floor as I walked in. Uniform pressed, ribbons displayed, rank gleaming beneath the shoulder epaulets. Colonel. My father's eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost. Derek's jaw dropped open just slightly, fingers frozen around the edge of a presentation folder. Miriam Reeves stepped forward immediately. She extended her hand. Colonel Monroe, it's an honor to have you with us. Please take your seat at the head table. Cameras clicked. A murmur spread across the room. I nodded once, then took my place at the front, between the CEO and the department liaison, directly facing the engineering team. Derek sat across from me, pale. He opened his laptop slowly. My father adjusted his tie, still stunned. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. Because today I didn't have to prove anything. All I had to do was watch. Listen, ask the right questions, and let the silence work its weight. I could feel their stares burning through me as the presentation began. Derek tried to keep his voice steady. He launched into the technical specifications of the proposed aerospace system, thrust ratios, materials, adaptive targeting modules. He was confident, at least on the surface. But I had reviewed 100 systems just like this. I had flown with them, tested them, seen what happened when something as small as a misplaced sensor caused catastrophic failure. When it was my turn, I leaned forward, hands folded neatly. Slide 18, I said calmly. Walk me through your redundancy measures for high-altitude engine failure. Derek blinked. Of course. The design accounts for... He hesitated. I waited. He fumbled to explain something that should have been airtight. We designed a secondary intake regulator, but the simulations aren't finalized yet. Why was it submitted as complete in the proposal packet? I asked, voice steady. My father cleared his throat loudly, trying to intervene. We're still validating a few subsystems. Standard practice at this stage, Colonel. Miriam Reeves cut in, gently but firmly. Mr. Monroe, let's allow Colonel Monroe to finish her assessment. He sat back in stunned silence. I continued. Has the system been tested at Mach 1.7 under variable humidity conditions? And can your team provide the thermal response logs for the actuator arms? Derek looked helplessly at his laptop. We don't have those figures in this version. I didn't flinch. Then your proposal is incomplete by military safety standards, I said. It places both the aircraft and the pilot at risk. That's not a gray area, it's a red flag. The room went silent. You could hear the shuffle of papers, the nervous rustling of suits. Miriam didn't speak, but her expression said everything. She'd expected excellence. She got excuses. My father looked like he had been physically struck. He turned slightly toward me, his voice low. You've been assigned to this project all along? I kept my eyes forward. Yes, sir, I was appointed 6 weeks ago. The Air Force takes these evaluations seriously. He didn't respond, just sat back, hands clenched tight on the edge of the table. Derek looked crushed, like his world had tilted under him and he didn't know where to step. For years, they saw me as a shadow in uniform, someone who had run away from the real world. But now, I was the one holding the pen. The one who decided if their work passed or failed. And they finally understood what it meant to carry weight without ever needing to raise your voice. After the technical review, I thought I'd quietly exit the building and disappear back into my work. But Miriam Reeves had other plans. We'd like to hold a brief press update, she told me as her assistant approached with a microphone and camera crew in tow. Given the importance of the contract, it would mean a great deal if you shared a few words about the military's expectations. I hesitated, then nodded once. Within minutes, the conference room had transformed. Reporters lined the back wall. A banner behind us read, Strategic Defense Initiative Briefing. The lights were hot, the microphones were live. I stood at the podium, still in full uniform. "My name is Colonel Layla Monroe," I began, scanning the crowd. "Today's evaluation is part of an ongoing process to ensure that any system we approve meets the highest standards of safety, efficiency, and resilience under combat conditions." Flashbulbs popped. The press hung on every word. The lives of our pilots and the success of our missions depend on these systems functioning not just well, but flawlessly. This is not about business, it's about trust. I paused. In the back of the room, I saw them, my father and Derek, pressed into a corner, shoulders tight, expressions unreadable. A reporter raised her hand. "Colonel Monroe, is your family here today?" My eyes met theirs. "Yes," I said softly. Another reporter asked, "What has this journey meant for you personally?" I considered the question. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice level. I joined the Air Force to serve something larger than myself. I've worked beside people who put everything on the line for each other. I've seen what leadership really means, under pressure, in silence, and sometimes in sacrifice. There was a brief silence, then quiet applause. Miriam Reeves stepped up beside me, smiling for the cameras. "Colonel Monroe will be overseeing the full audit process for our bid," she announced. "Her experience is not just impressive, it is essential to our alignment with defense requirements." The applause grew louder, but I didn't bask in it. I only nodded, because behind the cameras, behind the polite claps and corporate smiles, stood two people who had never clapped for me once in my life. Not at my promotion, not at my graduation from flight school, not even when I came home with a commendation for saving a crew mid-flight. And now, for the first time, they couldn't deny it. Not what I had done, not who I had become. But the silence in their eyes still hurt more than all the words they had ever said. After the cameras stopped flashing and the reporters left, I stayed behind to finish some paperwork with the liaison team. The energy in the room had shifted. People spoke to me with new deference, pausing mid-sentence to say, "Yes, Colonel," or holding doors like I was made of glass. I didn't care about any of that. I was gathering my notes when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Layla." I turned. My father stood there, still in his press suit, face stiff with something between disbelief and confusion. "Do you have a minute?" he asked quietly. I followed him down the hall to a small executive office, glass walls, sleek furniture, and a view overlooking the Seattle skyline. I remembered visiting him in a room like this when I was 15, proud just to sit in his leather chair. Now we stood across from each other, the space tight with unspoken things. "You kept this from us," he said. Not a question, an accusation. "I sent an email," I replied calmly. "Told everyone I'd been promoted." No one responded. He didn't argue that, just stared at the floor for a moment. This is a serious contract," he said slowly. "A lot of eyes are on us." And I treated it as such, I said. Like every other assignment, I followed procedure. He looked up. "You embarrassed Derek." I flinched, just slightly. Not at the words, but at the fact that even now it was Derek he was worried about. "Did he mention how he submitted an incomplete engine test?" I asked. "Or that he dodged basic safety criteria?" "That wasn't his call alone." "No," I said. "But he was the face of it, just like I'm the face of accountability." A silence stretched between us. He leaned against the desk, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I didn't think," he began. "I never thought you'd rise that far." There it was, the closest thing to an admission I would ever get. I didn't say anything, just stood, waiting. The door creaked open behind us. Derek stepped in. His eyes were glassy. He looked at me like he barely recognized the person in front of him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said, voice low. "Why didn't you say it was you overseeing the bid?" "Would it have changed anything?" I asked. "Would you have done your work differently if you knew your sister wore eagles on her shoulders?" He didn't answer. "I used to want your approval," I said quietly, looking at them both. "Used to think maybe one day you'd be proud, but today made something clear." I stepped toward the door. "You only see me now because of a title, not because I'm your daughter, not because I'm your sister. but because I outrank you. And then I walked away. No anger, no triumph, just the sound of my own heels. And finally, the sound of nothing behind me. It was a quiet Sunday in DC, the kind I rarely had time for. No meetings, no flights, no inspections. Just the smell of baked garlic and thyme drifting from my tiny kitchen, and the soft hum of jazz playing low on the speaker. I was hosting dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta, wine, and the comfort of my own space. A space where I didn't have to explain who I was or what I'd earned. At 6:15 sharp, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, my parents stood there. Mom held a covered casserole dish, my favorite, chicken with lemon and wild rice. Dad carried a bottle of wine. His face looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally seeing it with new eyes. They stepped in awkwardly like guests unsure if they were welcome. I didn't say much, just took the dish from Mom, offered them a place at the table. A few minutes later, there was a second knock. Derek. He looked unsure, holding a small box in both hands. "Hey," he said. "Hey. I made something. Thought you might want it." I took the box gently and opened it. Inside was a detailed model aircraft, matte gray, meticulously crafted, every panel precise. On the base was a small engraved plaque that read, "To Colonel Layla Monroe. Thank you for proving leadership isn't always loud." I stared at it for a moment longer than I meant to. "It's the design we revised after your audit," he added. "It passed last month." I met his eyes. This time there was no tension, no comparison, just understanding. We sat down to eat. No big speeches, no overdue apologies. But somewhere between the wine and the second helping of rice, I saw it in their faces. The shift. The way Dad asked genuinely about my next assignment. The way Mom refilled my glass without needing a reason. They didn't know all the things I'd been through. Still didn't ask about the deployments or the medals or the nights I couldn't sleep. But they were trying. Trying to see me, not just as the girl who left, not just as a uniform, but as someone they were finally proud of. And maybe that was enough. After they left, I stood at the window, watching the city lights blink quietly across the skyline. My uniform was folded neatly in the closet, waiting for tomorrow. But tonight, I didn't need it. I didn't need a rank to feel whole, or a badge to prove my worth. I just needed this stillness, this home I built on my own. And as I stood there, I thought to myself, I didn't need them to believe in me. I just needed to believe in myself long enough for them to catch up,